Unspoken Issues.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Unspoken Issues podcast. That is right. We are coming back at you with, oh my goodness, this is probably, for me, myself, a discussion that I probably should have had like really in our early days of this podcast. Chris Armstrong's with me this evening. We are going to be talking about the times Supreme ran into Bloodstrike, because it happened a couple times. You had shared, I believe, what had happened in issue 5 of Bloodstrike, either on the Unspoken Decade page or somewhere. I can't remember where it was. I swear you shared it.
Yeah, I think what had happened was a few years ago, I had put up, because on the Unspoken Decade Facebook page, we'll just post photos of covers, maybe sometimes panels and stuff, just the stuff that we like to spotlight. And right. I don't really do it very often, but a few years ago, I had done several, in over a few week span, and one of them was Bloodstrike number 5's cover, and I had shared that and put a little blurb about, can Bloodstrike take on Supreme or whatever, and it came up in my memories the other day.
Yes, okay.
A week or two ago. So I reposted it at that point, and you took note of it.
Oh, yes, I did, man, because I remember reading that comic. Yeah, I absolutely had to make a comment on it. It was an indelible mark that was left in my brain when I read that issue. The problem is what I realized preparing for this podcast is that I combined the two issues we're going to talk about into one story when they're not. I thought that was all one event that occurred, because we're also going to be talking about Supreme number 3, which is, I think, one of the first times that Supreme ran into Bloodstrike. And Granted, the two issues are, I think, the Supreme number 3 is June of 93, and Bloodstrike number 5 is November of 93. So they're not very far apart. However, in my own mind, I combined the stories. Essentially, they are sort of linked together. But the problem is that I thought this all went down at the airport, and that's not actually what happened.
I was just going to say, I had never read Supreme number 3, but I do remember reading this one, and I've read it a few times over the years, even since I was a kid. I did remember that they referenced that they had already run into Supreme once before this issue of Bloodstrike. And so when you told me, hey, we'll talk about both of them, I was like, well, I guess I need to read that one finally, because I never read it before. I read Supreme in the early days of the Image stuff. I had definitely the first issue, maybe the second. And then the only other Supreme issues I had from those early days were the 2 issues where he fought Thor, the Extreme Universe version of Thor. Well, I think it was like 7 and 8 maybe. But I'd never read the 3rd issue, so that was a first-time read for me today.
Yeah, I mean, the big point is that issue number 5 of Bloodstrike, what happens in that comic is just relentless bloodletting. And it is great. It is just fantastic. And
just brutality.
As soon as I saw you share the cover, I was like, man, I remember almost beat for beat what happens inside that issue. And I was like, why haven't we talked about this? Because you obviously were on board too. So Supreme number 3, title of the story is No Mercy. Like I said, came out in June of 1993, created and co-plotted this issue, Rob Liefeld. Pencils, co-plotter, script, colors, Brian Murray. Inks, Chris Ivey. Lettering, Kurt Hathaway. And here we go. In Supreme number 3, tension mounts as heads of state gather at Dulles Airport for the Pacifica Coexistence Summit, surrounded by heightened security. However, chaos ensues when a terrorist faction seizes control of the airport. The government calls upon Heavy Metal, which is a team that is led by the formidable Supreme, to intervene, and teams up with the members of Bloodstrike, who are already on site. Initially, Bloodstrike member Deadlock suggests that they have the situation under control, but they reluctantly brief Heavy Metal on the dire circumstances. It's believed that the terrorists have begun killing hostages shortly after they go over it with Supreme and Heavy Metal. That necessitates swift action. Despite Cabbot's insistence that Bloodstrike should handle the operation, Supreme defies his orders and boldly strides into the airport. The terrorists open fire, but to their shock, Supreme is impervious to their bullets. With a blood-splattered ferocity, Supreme begins to cut through the terrorists, gruesomely dispatching them and saving the hostages. When another gunman threatens the hostages upon seeing Supreme, he responds with a brutal display of power, using his heat vision to obliterate the attacker's skull. As the horrified Heavy Metal and Bloodstrike teams rush in, Supreme offers no explanation for his actions and swiftly takes flight, heading towards an incoming spaceship piloted by one of his old adversaries, the villain Chrome. Look, you're here listening to the Unspoken Issues podcast because we talk about 90s comics, but you may not know a whole lot about Image Comics. You may not know that their version of Superman was Supreme. And the big difference is that Supreme does not put up with anything. That is why he is honestly one of my favorite Image superheroes. When you're reading these issues, you can see, okay, yeah, this is a character that has very similar powers to Superman. He can fly. He's got kind of like heat vision, impervious or invulnerability, very powerful. But his attitude is what definitely separates him from Superman.
I don't even know anything about Supreme #2. It's been a while. If I read it, it was years ago. The first Supreme issue doesn't have a whole lot of violence or anything, but in this one, we definitely see. Rob Liefeld wanted a kind of an old man Superman. Like this is right. Supreme was actually listed as Volume 2, and Liefeld had said, I'll go back and do Volume 1 later because the idea was this was kind of a golden age Superman who had gone, or maybe a Silver Age Superman who had fought in World War II, had been a superhero, had all these adventures, and then left the Earth, kind of exiled himself from the Earth for years and years, and now he comes back. As an older man, got the gray hair, still has the power, and he's got this, 90s gritty edge to him, not afraid to kill, the bad guys. And, he doesn't have any patience for any of the other, superheroics that are going on in these comics.
Yeah, I was just kind of scanning through issue 2 here just to kind of see what was going on there. And that's where he first meets up with Heavy Metal.
That's an interesting concept, too. Like in the first issue, they introduced Heavy Metal, and it was kind of the government wanting to kind of use them to like team up with Supreme. And he didn't have much of a desire for that, if I remember right. But you kind of see those characters in the first issue of Supreme, and maybe you don't even see them until the second issue. It's hard for me to remember; it's been so long. But
I'm looking actually.
They've got some cool characters.
I'm checking it out to see if they did show up here. I know that. Yeah, it's been a while since I've read the early issues of Supreme. So seeing him like the leader of a team, that was never. You're right. It's a crazy concept because you're used to him just being a loner. He is by himself for a reason because he likes it that way usually.
For one, he doesn't really need the help. For most.
Yeah, exactly.
In most cases, there may be some times he does, but he's so much more powerful than everybody else.
It's interesting as you read through Supreme, and again, it's been probably 25 years or so since I've actually read the issues again. But just like Superman, they got to figure out a way to kind of de-escalate his power because he's, if you do have this guy, if this guy runs amok in the Image universe, there's going to be problems. But yeah, at one point he ends up losing his power, and so he starts relying on. You said you read the Thor issues, so I don't know if you remember. He ends up beating Thor, and the only reason he keeps the hammer around, he keeps it as a trophy. And I can't remember if he loses his power before meeting Thor. I don't think he does. But he loses his power after at some point. And so he keeps the hammer around to actually give him power. He keeps Mjolnir around to stay powerful. More and more things happen. And then, of course, Crypt happens at Extreme Sacrifice. And I don't know if you remember seeing those panels. But anyway.
I mostly just remember the ads and stuff. I don't know that I've read those.
So Crypt ends up messing him up bad.
I remember he came back as a younger version of Supreme at one point. Maybe Crypt killed him, and he came back he had black hair, and he was a younger version or something.
Right.
Maybe he didn't even have memories of being an older man.
Yeah, him showing up with Heavy Metal. Heavy Metal in this comic really doesn't do a whole lot here either. I mean, really, it's there's only a couple beats that happen here. Heavy Metal gets called to Dulles Airport. They show up. Bloodstrike gives him a hard time. Supreme goes in and he just cleans house, and that's about it. I mean. And then he takes off, and we got Chrome coming to Earth after that. But
one interesting thing I thought early in the issue, there's some government dudes talking about Supreme and talking into Heavy Metal about him, and they kind of reference how the U.S. was or the Allies were likely to win the war anyway, but because we're talking about World War II, Supreme basically won it on his own. He was so powerful, which I thought was kind of an interesting wrinkle. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot else. The art is pretty solid. I'm reading this, I think, same as you are, as a scan online, and The colors are really dark. I wonder if it would look the same. I wonder if that's just a problem with these scans, or if that's just the way it looked. The coloring was just too really dark, and it made some of the panels really muddy and hard to see. But overall, I kind of like the art in it. It's very of the time. But I think his name is Brian Murray. Is that right? The artist's name?
Right.
Assuming he's the one who designed the alien member of heavy metal, or seemingly the purple guy. I forget his name.
Skyraker?
Yeah, Skyraker. I really like that costume design. He's got like these weird fins on his face and like a metal plate over kind of over his nose, over his mouth. Just a really interesting costume. I like his suit or whatever.
When he starts talking, he's like making mention of a lot of the Rob Liefeld, Youngblood, alien references. Like I think there's a mention about a Catalan. Yeah. There's like Catalans and this, that, and the other. Clearly, he's got some kind of a history within that extreme universe. Heading over to Mike's Amazing World, Brian Murray, his credits start with, looks like in 85, he did an issue for Continuity Comics called Revengers featuring Armor and Silver Streak. You remember Armor for Continuity Comics? I've never read any, but I can remember the covers.
I don't. It rings a bell, but I can't place it in my head.
Yeah, you go and find a couple covers, you'll be like, oh yeah, I remember you, because I remember the Continuity Comics was like when I would go to the drugstore down here in Marietta. For some reason, they carried Continuity Comics, which maybe they had a larger reach than I realized. You'd think the old drugstore, the old local drugstore would be like, well, get me a Marvel Spider-Mans and the Supermans, but. Right. Not Continuity Comics, where I'm sitting there looking at, like, there were issues of Terminator. They'd carry Terminator comics, and they always had a weird, like, selection of stuff. But I can remember the Armor comics there.
I almost was going to say Chrome was a Continuity comic, but I'm looking now, that's Hot Comics. But I had an issue of Chrome that I probably got at a flea market or something when I was a kid. But that's not Continuity Comics, actually. So
okay. It looks like after this Continuity comic that he did, he gets some work at DC doing Young All-Stars, and he does like a solid run 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10 of Young All-Stars, which I don't recall. That's in 87, and then his credits here on Mike's Amazing World only go to like Supreme number 10. That's in 94. And then he does Rune number 2 in 95, and that's it. He's done.
That must have been the Marvel Rune.
Yeah, it said Rune number 2, Marvel, 95. When did that happen? When did that acquisition occur?
I think it was in early 95, late 94, early 95.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, he was working for Liefeld, so he probably made some pretty good money doing these. And then maybe he just, once the market collapsed, maybe he just got a job in marketing or something. Who knows? That's
the way it seems like. Brian Murray.
Oh, but he's solid. I like. It's definitely got a 90s energy to it. I like it.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let's go ahead and we'll pick a panel. And since Supreme is my favorite comic book character, I get to go first.
Go for it.
All right, so I'm just scanning, just make sure that there isn't anything else here, because I know what the easy one is. And I mean, I get it. I don't know. Okay, there's two, but I'm going. There's the one I'm picking is the one where he is just sticking his arms out and swinging like a tornado, just spinning, chopping. It's just his hands are going through people's faces. Yeah. Like one guy down in this is on, I mean, if you actually have the comic in front of you, down in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see page number 17. And this is the bottom panel. One guy is getting his head, I mean, from the nose, about the nose height, it's being chopped in half. Then there's another guy who's sitting beside him who just happens to be close enough to get like his eyes wiped out by Supreme's fingers. It is gruesome. Yeah. And it's, I mean, just looking at Supreme's face, he is, again, he's not putting up with anything, and he has no mercy when it comes to stuff like this. Like if he believes that you are in the wrong or you are going to do something wrong, it's not like he's going to Boy Scout it up and give you the opportunity to put your gun down. No, you're dead. You've made your decision already. Supreme's made his, and you're going to be at the wrong end of a Supreme tornado, I guess is what we'll call that. So All right, man. What do you got there?
I'm going to go a couple pages later. I think this is page 19. Only 2 panels here where one guy's begging Supreme for his life. And no mercy shown again. It's the bottom panel. He's using his, guess what would be his version of heat vision to blast the guy in the eyes. And, the next page we see the results, which is basically the guy's head exploding. But I like this panel because it really looks like his eyelids have been melted away.
Oh, does it ever, man?
And it's just his, bare eyeballs getting blasted with this, radiation, heat vision, whatever that is. Pretty gruesome.
Yeah, dude. And, we talk about this all the time when we pick panels. An artist has to come up with an idea of, okay, how's this going to look? The next panel, okay, I'm going to reference Raiders of the Lost Ark, maybe, because you can see some heads kind of melting and exploding in that or whatever. But in the panel before that, the one that you're picking, the artist has to get across like what is happening to this guy, and you could have went a real, I wouldn't say laid back way, but you could have went a different way, and it wouldn't have looked as impactful. Here, just like you said, the eyelids are not there. It looks like something is like flying back from his eyeballs. I don't know what that is, but I assume I have no idea. It's eyeball jelly or whatever, something is happening to this dude, and or it could just be, radiation. It looks like smoke though, almost, or some kind of liquid of some sort. It's gross. It's gross, but you're right, dude. It's good.
The exploding head, it almost looks like maybe he has superheated the guy's brain to a point where it explodes, and it makes his entire head explode.
Jeez. I love how, like, the team rushes in. I mean, you got to think about that. This is a team of superhumans that Supreme just left a few panels ago. And I don't think that they were planning on just sitting around there talking like, should we go after him? They probably ran after him. So in those split seconds, this is the carnage that happens.
Right.
All this happened so quickly.
Yeah, they mention in one of the, I'm looking for the panel. Yeah, when he first shows up, it says what follows lasts less than 4 seconds as Supreme becomes a blur of merciless violence.
Gosh.
So all that happens in a matter of seconds, basically.
This is my Supreme, by the way. Kid Supreme can go take a walk. Alan Moore's Supreme. I mean, look, Alan Moore, he's a great writer. I went back and revisited it. I know that if you go back to if you listen to the first 10 episodes, I've probably talked about Alan Moore Supreme at one point because I hated what he did with the character. Yes. I had to pull the knife out of my back. I wrote them a letter. But you've heard this story so many times. Chris is getting bored with it. Trust me. But no, this is my Supreme. This is really what made me go, okay, we're at a different level here. This is a different level of Superman. But the thing is I believe that I read this issue after the second one that we have featured here. But before we get into that, you did a little bit of homework. So anything left, though, unsaid on Supreme number 3?
The only other thing on Supreme 3, I had seen this cover before, him kind of facing off with Bloodstrike. I had never noticed until today, he's holding essentially that same terrorist that he evaporated his head. He's holding him by the collar there on the cover, and his head is just a smoking husk. But I'd never noticed that until today when I actually read this issue.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, that's all I got for that one.
Okay. All right. Well, so yeah, we're going to get into Bloodstrike number 5, which is what brought us to the dance. But you said you did a little bit of homework here by reading the 4th issue, which was, trust me, folks, if you pick up Bloodstrike number 5, you're going to be at a little bit of a shock when you open up the cover and 2 of the members are actually fighting each other. It gets pretty deadly. Kind of ought to know what happened in issue 4. So what did you say occurred?
Bloodstrike number 4 and 5 have always been like kind of we were talking about earlier, how Bloodstrike number 5, super violent, super gory, really impactful on, I was 12, 13, when these books came out. And I've always kind of had 4 and 5 linked together in my head because I reread those 2 issues together as kind of a 2-parter a lot when I was a kid. And Bloodstrike number 4 is almost as violent as number 5. And kind of the key premise of issue 4 is like what the characters kind of do on their off time, their downtime. So we kind of see Deadlock. It's really interesting that he's a member of Bloodstrike because he's also apparently a member of the Four, which is a supervillain team that Youngblood fights in their initial miniseries. And in Bloodstrike issue 4, we see a lot of stuff where Cabbot is kind of doing research to find out, like, is this Deadlock the same Deadlock from... He's kind of asking the same questions the viewer or the readers are asking. Like,
Yeah.
Is it the same Deadlock? He's talking to his AI, computer, and they're like, no, these two have different personalities, even though they look and dress the same and have the same name. Like, we don't think they're the same person.
Oh, okay.
And in the downtime, we see Deadlock is out on the streets, and he brutally murders these two guys that are bragging about how they basically assaulted some woman. And he like rips one's head off, rips one's spine out. But while he's doing this, he's kind of screaming at them because they ruined his kill. Like, he was stalking that woman and wanted to kill her himself. So this certainly seems more like the bad guy.
Yeah.
Towards the end of the issue, Cabbot is trying to get everybody back for a meeting, and Deadlock doesn't show up on time, so he has the computer teleport him back. Deadlock's none too happy to be brought back, and he kind of acts like he doesn't know why he's there. So is it like a split personality thing, or is this the wrong Deadlock? We don't really know. Really, I never got those answers because I never read anything past issue 5 or 6 of Bloodstrike when I was a kid, and I still haven't. But that's kind of sets up Bloodstrike number 5, because it opens up with Cabbot, the leader of Bloodstrike, in a fight with Deadlock.
Let's talk about what Bloodstrike is.
Sure.
The team, before we get into. So I know that Bloodstrike clearly is a team led by Cabbot. Just like you had mentioned, there's a large crossover that happens in issues 1 and 2 with Brigade, which is led by his brother, right? His brother,
right?
Bloodstone.
The Bloodstrike, the first 3 issues of Bloodstrike and the first 3 issues of the second Brigade series, the ongoing series that came after the miniseries, that's a crossover called Blood Brothers, and it's basically Bloodstrike trying to hunt down Brigade, and we find out in that crossover that the leaders, Brigade's leader Battlestone and Bloodstrike's leader Cabbot, are brothers.
Okay.
And they're both products of this project. I think it's called Project Born Again, which is like a government project that basically reanimates dead soldiers.
Yeah.
And then I think all of the Bloodstrike characters are members of that program. Like, they're all like basically zombies. They're basically sea soldiers that have been reanimated by the government.
Yeah, and when you say zombie, it's in concept itself, it's not like they're not yeah, right. They are brought back to life somehow in some way by this government project. Okay, so we talked about Cabbot Stone. Then we have Foreplay, who, as far as I could tell, doesn't have any powers other than she has 4 arms. She may be a little bit more strong, I guess. Maybe she's probably strong. She wouldn't be on the team if she couldn't handle herself.
And she's, maybe it's only because she has the 4 arms, so in order for her to look kind of normal, she has to be big.
Yeah.
She seems to be tall, taller, bigger than most of the female characters would be.
We talked about Deadlock already, who, I mean, really, if you were to draw a parallel between him and Wolverine, you wouldn't be too far off, especially in looks. I mean, the looks kind of remind me of that, the mask a little bit, but yeah, I mean, he doesn't have claws. He's more along the lines of like he's definitely got sharp teeth. I saw a close up of his face.
There's some ideas that he might be a vampire too.
Okay, all right.
Like, that's one of the things that Cabbot kind of is getting info when he's doing the comparison in the previous issue.
That's interesting. Then we have Shogun, who essentially is a massive armed to the teeth battle suit. So he has to get in there and pilot it. But that's Shogun. And then we have Tag, who, from what I understand, she's called Tag because if she touches you and she uses her power, you freeze in place. That's Tag. And that is Bloodstrike. So now what we've got to talk about is what happens in this issue. Title of this issue is Haywire. Story and layouts by Keith Giffen. Pencils and additional layouts by Chris Alexander. Inks by Marlo Alquiza. Jonathan Seibel as well. Script by Eric Stevenson. Colors Byron George Tallman. Oh, lettering Kurt Hathaway, by the way. Title of the story.
Kind of a coup for Liefeld to get Keith Giffen, who had a pretty big run in the 80s for, I think, DC. I believe he was the writer of the JLA, the Bwahaha version of the JLA.
Oh, okay.
He also did Trencher for Image.
Let me just go ahead and say, if I haven't been on record here, I swear that I have. What are we at? Like, we're close to episode 100.
Right.
I hate the way Trencher looked. I remember I own 3 comics that have the Trencher in it. I don't know what possessed me to buy them. I don't know if I was like, okay, this is another Image comic. I guess I was on the bandwagon, but man, I could not stand the way that thing looked. I didn't, I like some of his art on different things because he's an artist and a writer. I didn't like the Trencher art style at all either. Yeah. I never read that book. And he also did an Images of Shadowhawk issue where Trencher guest starred, and that was done in the same style. And yep.
Yeah, not a fan of that.
Yeah, and the thing is that I think a while back I forced myself to read a couple issues or something like that. The writing's fine, and I think it's fun to read. But could you imagine trying to color his pencils, like try or ink? I mean, coloring would be. I wouldn't know where to start and where to begin. It would be tough. Like, okay, I guess this is part of his shirt. Anyway, I listen. All the love for him, but I just couldn't stand to look at the comic. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wasn't a fan of that, specifically the art style. I never really read him, so I don't know. But as far as quality, just reading from his Wikipedia, he is known for his work for DC Comics on their Legion of Superheroes and Justice League titles, as well as for being the co-creator of Lobo and Rocket Records.
That's where, yes, Lobo. I was sitting there thinking to myself, I swear he's, somehow related to Lobo in some way. Well, like I said, this issue came in November of 1993. So a deadly and brutal showdown unfolds at the Bloodstrike headquarters. This is how we open the book, folks. We open the book where Deadlock and Cabbot engage in a one-on-one fight that quickly escalates. And they were already engaged as soon as you open up this book, by the way. The intense battle spills through several rooms until Deadlock makes a daring leap at Cabbot. Unflinching, Cabbot confronts him head-on, thrusting his fist through Deadlock's abdomen, putting a gruesome and horrifying end to their conflict. Although Deadlock survives, he's on the ground yelling, but I don't know how he...
twitching.
I don't know how well he fared. I'm sure he's left horribly wounded and requires immediate medical attention. They take him down to the labs there at Project Born Again. Now, as Cabbot heads down to the lab for his own injuries, which Deadlock took a chunk out of his chest, he definitely appears noticeably on edge and irritable, snapping at those around him. Now, Cabbot soon learns of Bloodstrike's next mission, to apprehend Supreme, who has discovered the terrorist base responsible for the Dulles Airport incident. Cabbot exudes unwavering confidence in the face of this task. En route to confront Supreme, Bloodstrike members Tag and Foreplay discuss Cabbot's attitude and mentally try to prepare for the impending confrontation. Upon arriving at the terrorist headquarters, they find it in ruins, clearly having been attacked before their arrival. Supreme meets the team, and when Cabbot announces their mission to apprehend him, Supreme responds with a fiery blast. Chaos ensues as Shogun unleashes his weaponry, only to have the bullets bounce off Supreme and inadvertently harm his own team members. Supreme swiftly incapacitates Shogun, violently opening his armor and delivering a brutal death blow by burying his hands into his chest cavity. Foreplay attempts to intervene, but Supreme mercilessly disarms her. Now, folks, I'm not even going to say folks. Chris, I had ChatGPT. I threw the notes in there, right? And I say, hey, do me a favor and write me a synopsis for this issue after looking at my notes. And the fact that I did not write disarms her, by the way, that was ChatGPT throwing some humor in there. So anyway, brutally, but Supreme mercilessly disarms her with a vicious swing of his fist. Tag makes an attempt to free Supreme in place, but he effortlessly counters by flicking her, and I say flicking her in the forehead, sending her flying. Fueled by rage, Cabbot launches a final assault on Supreme, unloading his weapons. However, Supreme seizes Cabbot by the face, thrusting his fingers into Cabot's eye sockets before punching through his abdomen. As Cabbot struggles to rise, Supreme grabs him, hoists him above his head, and gruesomely breaks his body in half across his knee. In the aftermath, Supreme takes flight, leaving a devastated and traumatized Tag to witness the carnage. She calls for transport to collect her fallen team members and return them back to Project Born Again. Oh my gosh, what an issue. Okay, so it is brutality that happens on these pages. This is the issue, and you picked this, so I want to let you go first, and then I'll kind of follow up here. So what are your thoughts here on Bloodstrike number 5?
Well,
Well,
again, this is one that, like, as a 12, when was the release date on this one?
93. So this has been November of 93.
So I turned 13 that summer, essentially. So just
15
a month before this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 15 for you. So I had seen some violent comics by this time because Image had a lot of that kind of stuff, but like nothing like this. This was another level. And I was just reading it mouth agape, hoping my parents never saw this comic and forbid me to buy, any of these ever again. And mostly it's the Supreme stuff. But even the battle with Deadlock, like you said, he kind of rips Cabot's chest open.
Yeah.
And then that punch, that's quite a super punch Cabot delivers that basically knocks the spine out of Deadlock's back.
Gosh.
Pretty intense. I did get kind of a kick out of Cabot thinking so little of Supreme.
Oh, yeah.
He basically is like, this guy's an old man. He's not going to be an issue. Like, I don't even know why we're bothering. They should have sent Youngblood to deal with this.
Yeah.
Interestingly, Youngblood had already gotten handled pretty much by Supreme. Not as violently as this, but Supreme kind of had a little fight with Youngblood in his first issue where they specifically Die Hard had a big confrontation that he got the lesser of. I love some of the lines that Supreme has. Like when they show up and once it's clear that a fight is about to take place and Shogun kind of unleashes some firepower and Supreme just says, if that contraption you're wearing turns into some form of transportation, I'd advise you to use that function to retreat. But of course he doesn't have time to do that. The best line he's got is as he's about to crush Cabot's face, he says, I hope you've seen the light because it's going out. And then
my gosh.
Then he shoves his fingers in his eye sockets and punches his guts out of his back, basically. Yeah, just ridiculously brutal. He also basically breaks his leg off at the knee and and for good measure, even though his entrails are all hanging out, he breaks his back as well. Just unbelievable. And it's also interesting that Tag has the ability to freeze people, which he'd used in previous issues, and unexplained, it doesn't work on Supreme. I'm not really sure why. I don't know if that's ever explained later, but it's kind of weird that like the one advantage Bloodstrike might have is that, and it does not work for whatever reason.
Right. The organs that are just laying about. I mean, you can be like, that's the dude's liver. That looks like some intestines there. I mean, the point in which he swings at foreplay. Yeah. And he just swings his fist, and I assume it's just because of how fast he swung through it. It just rips her two arms off her left side of the body, basically from right above the elbow off. But it doesn't just stop there. Pieces of her hand are flying toward the reader, and they're like, you can see the bones inside her fingers, and
individual fingers are flying off of her hand, and
oh my gosh, man! And
the layouts are by Keith Giffen. The pencils are Chris Alexander, and not exceptional art, but perfect for this book. And he really does a good job of showing the grotesque results of Supreme. And a few times, and it's probably maybe more of a colorist thing, there's a little, I wouldn't say there's too much blood, because I'm sure there would be a ton. But,
oh yeah, dude.
There's especially the panel where Cabot says to him, I'll see you in hell. This is after he's had his face crushed, so he's got no eyes in his eye sockets, and there's just, his mouth is open, and blood is just pouring out of his open mouth and open wounds on his face.
Man, I'll go ahead. I'm just going to tell you right now, that's my panel, by the way. That is my panel of this book, is him there's 3 panels in that sequence. And when Supreme releases him after putting his hand in his face, and then that should be it. But no, Cabot gets up and Supreme's like, you still move? And he has enough balls to say, I'll see you in hell, after he's been fucked up beyond belief with this.
Right.
I mean, with Supreme, dude, it is icing on this cake. It is the cherry on this sundae for me to just kind of see that. And there is so much, but it's a small panel, but it's just him getting up saying, "I'll see you in hell," through the blood that is just, I mean, it's disgusting. It's something I'd never want to see in a movie. Because I would probably be like, "Oh man, Armstrong would probably enjoy this, but I got to turn this TV off right now." There's just, it's just, it's disgusting. You got to think about this. This is Bloodstrike's comic.
Right.
And Supreme showed up, and I said this last night when we were in the chat, dude, if this was a Marvel comic, which it definitely isn't, these teams are going to scuffle. They're going to see the error of their ways, or somebody's going to come to an understanding.
Yeah. And
they're going to see themselves off and go their separate ways. But no, this team book just met one of the most horrifying ends I've ever seen a team meet in their own book. And I'm sure there's some pretty bad stuff out there, but they got decimated.
Yeah.
And
Supreme just shows up in their own comic in Rex's house. And
it's great, dude. I'm 15. I'm reading this and I was like, well, why would I want to go back to Marvel? Well, I'm 15. I mean, I should have known they had some good writing over there. However, folks, you aren't getting this on the page. If it is, it's implied. And when Marvel started pushing the envelope with it was way too late for me to be like, well, you guys missed the boat. Image has done this already. And
yeah, Image had some pretty violent stuff. Like, Shadowhawk was breaking people's backs.
Mm-hmm.
Even in the first issue of Youngblood, Sci-Fi, or one of their telepathic or telekinetic character, there was a Saddam Hussein stand-in, that they blew. He basically made the guy's head explode, but that was kind of off panel. You didn't really see it.
I remember we talked about that issue. I think we did that actually on an episode.
In this one, it's just like, no, we're going to show you the whole thing.
Yeah, it was in your face. It was nonstop. This was a Supreme that nobody had an answer for. I don't think it's let on in this issue that Supreme knows that this team is made up of people that have been dead before. But
yeah, I was curious about that because, he has X-ray vision, so maybe he could tell by looking at their internal organs and stuff. Like he calls
Shogun,
he says end of the line abomination before he rips his guts out.
Exactly.
And, now, is that because he knows that he's supposed to be dead already, or is it because he sees him as an abomination because he was using like a super suit and he doesn't have any powers or something like that? And I don't know if it's ever revealed later. Maybe it is. I don't know that Supreme and Bloodstrike had any other interactions after this. I would hope so. Hope not for Bloodstrike's sake.
Well, if Bloodstrike ran into Supreme again, I hope they learned their lesson. And they just, okay, all right, sir. Can we talk about this, please?
Can I get you a coffee?
The whole abomination line, the end of the line abomination, that to me makes me think, okay, Supreme knows that these people have died before. Although I don't know. I don't know if Shogun's died. I assume he has.
He also calls Cabbot a parasite when he breaks his back there too. I don't know if that's supposed to mean something or if that's just a standard insult.
The whole Project Born Again, you really don't know how. I mean, obviously the big question is how in the hell are they bringing these people back to life? And it does escalate really quickly. Like they show up and they're like, hey, we're going to bring you in. And he's like, no, I don't think you are. And I guess Shogun's like, pretty impressive not, which he's not referenced, but he unloads on him. And I think that's when Supreme's like, okay, kid gloves are off. If you went up to anybody else and said, do you remember Bloodstrike number 5? I don't know if they would or not, but I could tell you I sure did.
Right. Me too. Yeah. I mean, it's got to be on a short list of most violent mainstream comics, if you want to consider stuff like Marvel, DC, Image, Dark Horse, that kind of stuff, like the big Malibu, the big publishers of superhero comics and stuff. So obviously nowadays Invincible, like you see stuff like this in almost every issue of Invincible. And I know Robert Kirkman was a big fan of early Image stuff, so that's probably part of the reason why Invincible has so much violence in it. But yeah.
What's your panel, man?
It's a tough one. Like I said, A lot of cool stuff in this. I really like the panel where he looks inside Shogun's suit and sees the man inside there, and you see kind of the mechanics of the Shogun suit. Obviously, I like it when he blows Cabot's guts out. But similar to that one, I'm going to go with the panel where Cabot actually punches through the back of Deadlock and kind of pushes his spine out the back.
Could you imagine if you just picked this? Hey, I'm going to go get some comics. Okay, well, this Bloodstrike number 5 looks pretty interesting. You haven't read anything about Bloodstrike, and you just open it up to that, and you're like, oh, these two teammates are fighting again, or something along those lines. But no, that guy just punched him through, put his fist through that guy's chest. I mean, what a way to open the issue. Full page spread too. Mm-hmm. Of him laying on the ground after that. But yeah, you're saying it's when he puts the fist through and you can see the spine coming out the back. It's a good pick. Crunch.
Always some cool sound effects in these Image comics early.
Oh yeah, sure. Well, man, there it is. That was Supreme number 3 and Bloodstrike number 4 and number 5. Big iconic issues in the personal lives of Jesse Starcher and Chris Armstrong. Big treat for you guys. So what do you got going on over there at Small Screeners?
Yeah, I also do another podcast with my buddy AJ where we do it's called Small Screeners. We talk about direct-to-video and made-for-TV movies. As of this recording, I'm not sure when this is going to come out, but we're heading into October here pretty soon, spooky season. So
that's right.
I think we're going to cover the 2 made-for-video Phantasm sequels, Phantasm 3 and 4, in October. And we're also going to do a bonus episode on horror anthologies. And actually, before that, I'm going to have my buddy Jesse here.
That's me.
We're going to join us for a crossover where we talk about Justice League, The New Frontier, the comic book, and the direct-to-video animated movie they did in, I think, 2009 or 10, somewhere in there. So a lot of stuff coming up from Small Screeners. So you can check out the social media for that on X and Instagram at Small Screeners. I'm also on those sites at BrodyMan34.
All right, very good. Well, hey, in the can right now, that's aired right now. Recently, this week as we're recording, Mark Radulich and I got together for an episode of Source Material, the comics podcast here. If you're listening to this feed, most likely you've probably seen this on the feed, where we talked about Supergirl Power. And it is the first, I think, 6 issues of her 2007 run. It came out of Superman, Batman, when she kind of reappeared. So there's that. And then 28th of August, you could have heard me, Chris, and Evan Bevins talking Battle Chasers number 1. That was a fun book. So did you go grab the newest issue?
I did. Yep.
All right.
There have been 3 issues. They got to kind of a stopping point, and then in the back it kind of said, "Hey, once we have a few more issues in the can, we'll be back." So who knows when we're going to
see you in 10 years?
Yeah.
Oh, geez.
But pretty cool continuation. I like the new Battle Chasers. It's not the same as Joe Mad on the art, and like it's weird that like the original Battle Chasers came out in the late '90s, early 2000s, and now the new one is like, I don't know about necessarily R-rated because there's no like nudity in it, but there's like people dropping F-bombs and stuff, and it's like, ooh, I don't mind that in most comics. Like if you've already established one tone, right, like in the first
a bit jarring.
Run, it's weird that these characters. It's kind of like when Wolverine and the Professor X started dropping F-bombs into Logan. It's like, why are they doing this now when they were?
It's a little unnecessary. We know you're rated R. You don't have to be rated R that way. Come on.
But yeah, it's a cool book.
All right.
One more thing. By the time this comes out, most likely I'll have up a new look at Bloodstrike on the UnspokenDecade.com. You always want to check out that for some 90s goodness. And I did a little essay on Blood Brothers, which was the Brigade Bloodstrike crossover. So you can see a little more Bloodstrike info on UnspokenDecade.com.
All right, that's Chris Armstrong over there. I'm Jesse Starcher. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you soon. Have a good one. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us Unspoken Issues is part of the UnspokenDecade.com, the home for 90s comics, blogs, and podcasts. Unspoken Issues also has a Facebook group you can join if you are interested. Just search the Unspoken Issues podcast and request to join. All of this would not be possible without W2Mnet.com and the Rattlich and Broadcasting Network, so make sure to seek them out for more podcasts. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please feel free to share, and we look forward to entertaining you again soon.